This meeting will come to order. Today is Tuesday, February 14, 2017. This is a voting meeting of the Prescott City Council. I want to welcome everybody for coming out today. We just finished a 2-hour session, so if you look like we're kind of glazed up here in the eyes, don't worry about it. We'll stay awake and get through what we got today. We got a fairly lengthy agenda today also. Mayor Pro Tem, do you have any introductions?
No, sir, but I will remind you, we also had almost a 2-hour executive before that. So, yeah, okay. You're right. Our eyes are kind of glazed over.
Okay, our invocation today would be by Father Ralph from the Sacred Heart Catholic Church. Pledge of Allegiance would be by Councilman Chiska.
Would you like to bow your heads while we pray? Almighty God, you are our light, our wisdom, and our strength. We ask for your guiding hand to lead us through our meeting today. May we accomplish our tasks with wisdom, and may we work together in a spirit of respect and understanding. May our conduct create an environment of cooperation and kindness. Help us to accomplish our work this day, and bless us in our service to the people of Prescott. We ask these things in your holy name. Amen.
Amen. Amen. Would you please join me in the pledge? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Hoorah. Roll call, please.
Mayor Oberg.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Lamerson.
Here.
Councilman Blair.
Here.
Councilman Lozelle.
Here.
Councilwoman Orr.
Here.
Councilman Shiska.
Here.
Councilwoman Wilcox.
Here.
All present.
City Manager, do you have any announcements?
I do not, sir.
Okay, we'll start with our presentations.
Item A, presentation by Sister Cities introducing Consul General German Alvarez.
Good afternoon, Mayor,
Welcome.
Mayor Pro Tem, council members, and staff, and ladies and gentlemen. First of all, Mayor, I want to thank you for allowing us to make a presentation today on a very important subject. We have a new Consul General that has been transferred from Guaymas, Mexico, to lead El Salvador from a diplomatic standpoint in the city of Tucson. I'm sorry it couldn't be Prescott. But once again, I will introduce him here shortly. 10 years ago, I stood before this council, and I remember well my good friends Steve Blair, Mayor Pro Tem Lamerson, and I was asking the council to consider a sister city in El Salvador. Why El Salvador? Well, El Salvador has had a history of being a very close ally of the United States of America. During the Iraq War, Mayor Lamerson gave me an American flag. This is really sentimental. To give to the Secretary of Defense in El Salvador the day before a battalion of Special Forces troops were being sent to fight alongside our troops and the coalition forces in Iraq. That evening, my wife was with me. I took the flag, and a good friend of mine who had served in the Marine Corps as a captain, wounded several times, was visiting with me, and I said to him, you know, Gene, I don't want to give this flag. I want you to do it. So he presented the American flag to the Secretary of Defense, and in one side there was a battalion of our Marines, which, as you know, in any country, they're stationed there to take care of the embassy. And the other side of the room were the Salvadorian army troops that were being sent. And the Marine gave the flag to the Secretary of the Defense, and then they sang, all of them stood up, the United States of America, our song. And then the other side, the Salvadorian soldiers got up, and while their national anthems were being played, all of them stood up and applauded. The next morning, I went to the airport, and there was a huge transport plane that took our troops to Iraq. Today, as I stand before you, and I mentioned this to Mayor Pro Tem Lamerson, we still have about a platoon and a half of troops fighting alongside our troops in Afghanistan. It wasn't Mexico, it wasn't Peru, it wasn't Chile, Bolivia, or any of those Latin countries that stepped up to the plate. It was a small country in the Pacific Ocean, which we now have as a sister city. Today, I wanted to bring you up to date on some of the accomplishments that we have done in the past, and with the help of some of the council members and some who are not here anymore. Through Mayor Kuykendall, we took an ambulance down there, driven by Dr. McKella and a good friend of ours, Bob Greninger, through all the infested areas of Mexico full of gangs, through the jungles, and we delivered the ambulance to the mayor of Suchitoto. That was 7 years ago. We built a children's park in Suchitoto, in the headquarters where the rebels had started the war, which lasted 12 years, and it cost us 90,000 lives. We have given scholarship money, which was raised by former council members, so we can get the kids to stay in Suchitoto, stay in El Salvador, get educated, training as a carpenter, mechanic, whatever, and keep them from crossing the border into our state of Arizona. This has worked very, very well. And the last thing regarding the funding mechanism that you have given us has been the money you gave us for the earthquake. We had a major earthquake, and the city council put together $10,000 with the citizens to provide that support to them. A year ago, Mayor Olberg and I met with the members of our Suchitoto committee, and he said, well, let's put together a program where we can raise $10,000 and bring 6 students and 2 teachers to Prescott so they can learn about Prescott. And through the tremendous support of APS and the people are here today, we have raised $4,000. We believe we're going to have another 5 coming, hopefully, by the end of May. So there's been a lot done. Today, Suchitoto is a growing city. Tourism has spiked about 13%. We're shipping textiles, beans, sugar to our country, and we remain a very strong ally of the United States of America. Finally, I would like to ask Darla Danville and her boss, Steve, to come up. And to my side, ladies and gentlemen, is the Consul General of El Salvador, Herman Alvarez. Para presentarlo, I have to translate.
Excuse me, no, my English no is good. Español es mejor para mí.
Spanish is better for me.
Quiero, en nombre de nuestro gobierno, agradecerles
I want, in the name of my government, to thank you
por todo el esfuerzo y sacrificio que han hecho por ayudar a nuestro pueblo de Suchitoto.
for all the work and all the hardships that you've done in funding to help our little sister of Suchitoto.
He venido desde Tucson manejando, y si hubiese tenido que venir arrodillado para pedirles que sigan apoyando, lo haría.
He says that he drove from Tucson, but even if he had to come kneeling down, he would come before this council to ask that you keep supporting Suchitoto.
Porque hemos pasado muchas cosas en nuestro país, como guerras, delincuencia, corrupción, diferentes circunstancias, pero hoy estamos peleando no solamente con la delincuencia, sino con la pobreza.
Even though we've been through wars and suffered a lot of casualties, we feel that we're in the right path together with the help of the United States, to bring peace, prosperity, and eliminate the gangs that are going on that suffocate the country.
Tenemos instrucciones de nuestro presidente de la República de tratar la manera de hacer hermanamientos, acercarnos con las ciudades de Estados Unidos, ser transparentes para poder seguir teniendo esa ayuda que siempre le hemos tenido de parte de este lindo país.
We're hoping, and in the name of our president, I want to mention to you that we want to continue the relationship that has brought and continue to bring El Salvador closer to the United States.
Traigo una carta de la señora mayor o alcaldesa de la ciudad de Suchitoto, en donde les agradece el apoyo a la ciudad de Prescott por todo el apoyo que ha hecho y que solicita que sigan haciéndolo por las necesidades de nuestra gente.
We have a letter that we want to present to you, Mayor, on behalf of the Mayor of Suchitoto, wherein she asks that you continue to give us the support you've given in the past.
Ella les pide a través de este servidor que puedan seguir apoyándolos. Tenemos 7 años de no tener ahorita una ayuda y quiere restablecer el hermanamiento con ustedes.
We have been absent from any support for 7 years, and we humbly ask that we can, you can put together through the Chambers Civic Association support for what we need now.
Existen diferentes necesidades y algunos de ustedes ya lo hicieron, construyeron un parque, mandaron una ambulancia, hicieron muchas cosas que lo agradecemos y lo llevamos en el corazón siempre.
You have done so much by establishing the park, the Children's Park, which has a big plaque that says City of Prescott, the ambulance, and many more things that you've done that I can't mention.
Y como muestra de ese agradecimiento yo quiero hacerlo, deseo hacerlo, espero que me permitan hacerlo, venir a barrer un día un parque de esta ciudad en muestra de humildad y cariño a esta linda ciudad.
With all humble respect, I ask that you allow me to come in one day, full day, to clean one of your parks as a sign of appreciation what you have done. Yeah.
Es como muestra de humildad, de cariño y respeto para ustedes y espero pues que sigamos de la mano recibiendo esa ayuda que tanto necesita nuestro Suchitoto. Gracias.
Once again, thank you very much for allowing us to come and make a presentation to you. And I think before we go to the next one, we have a couple of things. Las flores.
Okay.
With your permission, Mayor.
How kind. Thank you. Thank you very much. Gracias.
Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you.
La placa. And this is a plaque of appreciation to Arizona Public Service, to Darla DeBell, and to her boss, Steve Wright.
Sí. Gracias a ustedes.
Mahalo. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And we'll link the Consul General up with Joe Baines. Okay, we'll move on to let's see, I've got one comment from the Mayor Pro Tem.
Council General, I'm humbled by your presence. Appreciate you coming here from El Salvador. I was humbled by the willingness of the small country of El Salvador to stand with American troops in our time of need. Our bonds are solid with El Salvador, and they will remain solid with El Salvador as long as the peoples of El Salvador and the United States remain committed in worldly peace and efforts to bring worldly peace. Thank you for being here.
Okay, we'll move on to item B.
Item B is the oath of office for Prescott City Judge Glenn Savano.
Afternoon.
Before we read Judge Savona's oath of office, we'd like to present him with sort of a token of our appreciation for his 27 years, 26 years of service as the city prosecutor. Just so that the audience may not be able to see this, this is Glenn's original badge and his original ID. I was actually looking for this guy in the audience, and I saw his dad here, so.
Very nice.
So we want to present this to Judge, to Glenn, to Glenn. Well, you're still Justice Peace, Glenn. So, and thank you for your service.
Raise your right hand. State your name.
I, Glenn Savona,
Do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I will support the Constitution
that I will solemnly support the Constitution
of the United States
of the United States
and the Constitution and laws
and the Constitution and laws
of the State of Arizona
of the State of Arizona
and the Charter
and the Charter
and the laws
and the laws
of the City of Prescott,
of the City of Prescott,
that I will bear true faith
that I will bear true faith
and allegiance to the same
and allegiance to the same
and defend them against all enemies,
and defend them against all enemies,
foreign and domestic,
foreign and domestic,
and that I will faithfully
and that I will faithfully
and impartially
and impartially
discharge the duties
discharge the duties
of the office of City Court Judge
of the office of City Court Judge
at the City of Prescott
at the City of Prescott
according to the best of my ability.
according to the best of my ability.
So help me God.
So help me God.
Okay.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Sarah.
I'm gonna send one over
Very
to
nice. I want to see.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
We all age a little bit.
Just a tad. 26 years in the making, they finally get me out of my parking spot.
You clean up well, though.
I want to thank everybody here, first of all, for giving me the honor, first of all, this 26 years with the City of Prescott. It's been a pure pleasure. And I hope that I'm able to continue with the legacy that Judges Keebler and Wood and Markham have all established for the court, with respect and dignity, not only for the office itself, but of the people that we see before us. So I thank you again.
Nice.
And Mr. Palladini, will you take a moment to explain the fact that we have, he serves both the county and the city?
Right. Judge Savona is both the justice of the peace for the Justice District in the county, and as you recall from our meeting 2 weeks ago, we approved his contract as city court judge for the next 2 years. And so it's a merged judicial system, the JP and city court system, which for both the county and the city is a significant, efficient way of doing things, and certainly a cost savings to both county and the city in doing it that way. And it's been, and I think Prescott's been doing that, using that process for years now, and we hope to continue to use that process into the future.
Okay, thanks for that explanation. I just want everybody to kind of understand. If they see him over there on the, the Yavapai side, county side, then they see him at the city, just wonder if he's moonlighting or whatever. Anyway, let's move on to the consent agenda.
Consent agenda. Item A, approval of minutes for the council meetings held on January 24th and January 30th, 2017. Item B, approval of amendment number 1 to the agreement for potable water with Bethel Development Incorporated for construction of a 72-unit apartment complex at 519 Miller Valley Road. Item C, approval of amendment number 1 to the agreement of potable water with Rand and Associates for construction of a 200-unit apartment complex at 2015 Willow Lake Road. Item D, adoption of resolution number 4371-1580, approving an intergovernmental agreement with the Yavapai Prescott Indian Tribe for the purpose of providing all-risk emergency response and fire prevention activities by the Prescott Fire Department. Item E, approval to return the Economic Strength Project grant for the extension of Corsair Avenue in the Prescott Air Park, awarded by the Arizona Department of Transportation and Arizona Commerce Authority. Item F, adoption of ordinance number 5023-1561, an ordinance of the mayor and council of the city of Prescott, Yavapai County, Arizona, authorizing the acceptance of a water meter easement agreement from Nikki Prescott LLC and authorizing the mayor and staff to execute any and all documents to effectuate said easement agreement.
Do I have a motion?
Mayor, I'll make a motion if there's no discussion. All right, I'll make the motion to approve consent agenda items 8A through 8F.
Second.
Yeah, I got a motion and a second. Vote, please.
Oh, hang on.
Light the candles.
All those that agree say aye.
Light the candles.
Okay, try it again.
There you go. Passes unanimously.
Okay, we'll move on to liquor agenda.
Item 9A, the liquor license agenda. There are two special event liquor license applications on today's liquor license agenda. A request by Prescott Center for the Arts for an event to be held on Saturday, March 18th from 2 to 6 p.m. and a request by Prescott Frontier Days for an event to be held at 840 Rodeo Drive on Saturday, March 4th from 5 p.m. to 11 p.m. The applications have been determined to be in compliance with city requirements and are being recommended for approval. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
Questions, comments from the council? There being none, do I have a motion?
Mayor, I move to forward special event liquor license applications 9A1 and 9A2 to the Arizona State Liquor Board with a recommendation of approval.
Second.
Passes
Did we
unanimously.
have a second on that?
Yeah, we did.
Okay, I didn't hear it.
Passes unanimously.
Move on to the regular agenda.
Item 10A, award of 26 facility and building maintenance service contracts for maintenance and repairs of city buildings in an amount not to exceed $20,000 per individual repair cost.
That's all right. Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Facilities Management Division is requesting approval to enter into 26 facility and building maintenance service contracts for plumbing, roofing, flooring, painting, electric, pest control, tree services, landscaping, locksmith, drywall, and decking concrete. This will help facilitate maintenance and repairs in and on buildings in the Facilities Management Fund and throughout the city. The Facilities Management Division routinely services for repair and maintenance for 57 buildings, which is over 300,000 square feet of office and warehouse space, and 175,000 square feet of parking garage under its fiscal annual maintenance and repair responsibilities. Per the procurement code, we are required that all maintenance and services that exceed $3,000 per repair be competitively quoted. This process involves using at least 3 different companies of the particular trade to bid each process. Frequently, the accumulation of repairs made under any one vendor purchase or vendor throughout the year approaches $10,000, which is the procurement limit for the given year, whereby those services must then be approved by council before proceeding. This results in delays for completing the repairs or in the city paying more for a service than the lowest competitive quote. By approving the attached bid list for up to $20,000 for any of the vendors listed, Facilities Management may effect repairs in a timely manner while adhering to procurement procedures. The Facilities Management Division will continue to receive quotes on each repair using the approved list of vendors and contracts. If an individual repair cost exceeds $20,000, the project will be brought to council for additional approval. Utilizing these contracts for small repairs will allow the division to continue using local vendors and select the lowest price quoted for each repair. The contracts will also ensure that the division is following the procurement code while performing facilities maintenance. And funding of $295,000 is available in the FY17 Management Fund for these services. At this time, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Councilman Lozelle.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a quick question. This $20,000 is not per vendor unless it like the particular job was a vendor, but if, let's say something happened to this wall, that'd be include the drywall, the plumbing, electric, what have you, the roof, and that would be the $20,000 for this project.
So essentially what we're asking for is the ability to utilize a vendor for over the $10,000 limit per year.
Oh, so this is per vendor?
This is to get into a contract with each vendor so that we can procure services from. Essentially what happens at this point is once we reach $10,000 limit, we can't use the vendor for the rest of the year. They may be the lowest price vendor, they might have the best service that we can get, but we can't utilize them any longer because they've reached the $10,000 limit of our procurement code. So these are small, usually small projects, $200, $300, $1,000 maybe. They're under the $3,000, but we still get competitive bids because we want to make sure that they're in line with each other.
So everything is the same, you'd still come to us on that cap?
Exactly.
The $3,000 or less is administrative, you're just, okay, so, yeah, if I'm a great sub, and just because I've hit the 10,000, you can't use me anymore?
That's how it currently is.
Okay.
And it makes the process longer. And we have quite a list, extensive list. The reason the list is so long is that we do, still reach out to these vendors and get quotes from them and pick the best service, best quote, best price for the city. It just allows us to continue to do these services. And as you can see, the $295, that's our annual amount funded. So if we were to go out and use, we would have to do 29 individual companies just to meet that $10,000 threshold. So essentially what we're asking for is permission to, through this competitive bid process, use the pricing and the companies that we have had respond to the bid. And that's not to say that we won't or can't use other companies. We just cannot exceed that $10,000 limit with the other companies that haven't bid yet.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
Councilwoman Wilcox.
Another clarification, is the Facilities Maintenance Fund one of those internal service funds that is a combination of chargeback from various funds, the water fund, the solid
Correct.
waste,
So
et cetera?
we do an annual charge based on the building's square foot, and that can depend on whether it's warehouse size, office space, like the shop, central garage has the large areas aren't the same price as office space. So it depends on the use of the building, but it is charged per square foot for maintenance and then per square foot for janitorial service if needed.
Thank you.
Actually, I thought it was coming out of open space, but I guess that's not good.
That's next year, FY18.
Councilman Blair.
You use the statement, the lowest price, and I'm not, you mean you're going to use the lowest of these that are in those parameters? Because I'm not sure that the lowest price is always the way you want to go.
That is also a very true statement. We do assess the contractor's abilities, prior use with the contractor, work that they've done, quality. And yeah, you're right. What we do as procurement agents, and Mark might be able to speak to this, but we're not always bound to the lowest price. We go for a combination of quality, meeting the specifications, and the price. So we need to make sure that it meets all those specs for city residents.
I was just looking at that, thinking about what you just said, and on the painting side, there may be one of those groups of 5 painters that are more qualified to do structural stuff like the parking garage, opposed to somebody that does interior painting. And so I'd hate for you to ever just hinge it on the lowest price, because I think that's the wrong
We're
thing.
not saying that this is, essentially what we did is we asked for an hourly rate, an overtime rate, emergency call-out rate, and then the materials markup. This is what the vendors provided as far as their rate is, but that doesn't necessarily mean, most of you know as private business owners, that there's times where your rates fluctuate when you don't have as much business going on, or sometimes the company that would normally give us the lowest price isn't available or able to do the work at that time. So we are still going to be getting competitive quotes on everything that we're doing.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Before we go on to the next person, Mr. Palladini, can you refresh for me? I thought I remember you saying in the past we had to go with the lowest bidder, but
Lowest responsible bidder.
okay, so best value would not be allowed?
I guess it depends on how you define value. In other words, when we do it, in this particular instance, we don't really look at responsive because for the most part, these are fairly simple to respond to. But if you look at public works projects, sometimes people will submit a bid on a big project that's not responsive because it doesn't address the actual project, so we kind of just throw it out automatically. We look at lowest and responsible bidder, so it's the bidder who's qualified and able to do the job. If a bidder has done poor work in the past, we might, even though they may be the lowest, we may not use them. So we look at the responsible element of lowest responsible is where we look at kind of the quality. If it's a simple job and one of the lower bidder is able to do that simple job, normally you go with that. But if it's something more complicated or more complex, you may not always go with the lowest bidder because of either past performance, or not past performance with city here, or past performance from other cities or other contracts they perform, because we'll call references at times, depending. So it's lowest responsible, meaning quality and price.
Okay, thanks for the explanation. Councilwoman Orr.
Yes. So I know we have to go with the lowest responsible, but can we also give some preference or some effort for local vendors?
Yes, and I would say most, not every single one of these on the list is local vendor, but we do have a core group of vendors that, as you said, that have been qualified. Responsive is a big thing for us. In a lot of these facilities things, we need somebody who's able to get there within a reasonable amount of time and get the job done for us. So I would say that I don't think every single one of them is a local vendor, but we do try to go with local vendors.
It just seems like when we buy and we purchase, often it's with fleet service or something down in the valley.
Well, a couple of things. We are precluded by law from having a local preference as a matter of practice. Now, again, a little bit broader on the discussion side, but oftentimes we'll hire engineering firms, for instance. There is sort of it's not a local preference, but it's local familiarity is one of the elements we look at. So there is kind of a local preference, but it's based on substance. And then what Mike was just saying is if part of it's response time on one of these vendors, and one's going to take 3 hours or 2 hours to get here, and the other can get here in a half hour, and it's some sort of emergency.
Sure.
You go, obviously, and if it's a little bit more, time is of the essence, those kinds of things.
Good.
For the most part, with vehicle purchases, we buy them through state contract because that's the lowest, that's the best price you're going to get. So in those cases, almost inevitably, you're going to buy vehicles from Valley car dealerships because they have the state contracts, and those are without a doubt the best value or the best price you're going to get. Even if you figure in the sales tax that we might get, let's say it's 2% or whatever on the local tax, the price you're going to get on the state contract is well below what you would have gotten on the sales tax. So it's the better deal.
We've asked our dealerships here, and they just aren't interested
I heard that, yeah.
Yeah, Mike's made multiple overtures, I think, to the local dealers.
And the practical reality is when you have a state contract, you're selling thousands of vehicles across the state. So there's just no way that they can compete with that because they're making small margins, but they're doing huge volumes. So that's the
and they actually don't mind the fact that they get the warranty work because that's where a majority of the revenue is produced. So
just seems we encourage our residents to shop locally.
Absolutely.
And so that's good to hear. So thanks, Mike.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Mayor. Quick question. Non-life-threatening. Somebody breaks in over to fleet maintenance or breaks into the water division or whatever, do some damage to your cars. They call it vandalism, etc. So you call up the cops come out there and spend 4 hours trying to figure out what went on, blah, blah, blah. Does the police department interagency bill you back for the time they had to take out of police resources to provide you the time?
I don't believe so.
Thank you.
Any other questions, comments from the council? Any from the public? Okay, do I have a motion?
Mayor, I move to award the building maintenance service contracts as listed on attachment 1.
Second.
Yeah, I have a motion, second vote, please.
Passes unanimously.
Okay, let's move to B.
Item B, discussion of the public safety personnel retirement system funding options to include reserve funds and reduce spending through alternative service delivery.
I think I'd like to open up with a brief discussion on this. I talked to a lot of people, and one of the things that I'm finding out is that a lot of people are hearing different things, using different numbers, coming up with different ideas. I heard somebody recently said the reason why, we're so far behind in our liability is because we borrowed from the fund and never paid it back, which is totally untrue. We've had people say that, we never made the payments we were supposed to make. We made the minimum payment like you can do on your credit card, which is totally false. We've always paid exactly what we were told to pay. I have people saying that, it's 81 million, 82 million, 83 million. I've heard 86 million. I've heard 90 million. So there's a lot of speculation out there, and I think if we're going to be going out to the public and really laying out a case, we have to make sure that we're dealing from facts. And the one fact that we do know right now is that the unfunded liability, based on the last report, was 78.6 million. Is that correct, Mark?
I believe 78 point, I don't know specifically, it's 0.5, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
We just had a pension expert from the Reason Foundation come up and speak to us at a town hall. Don't know how many of you might have been able to attend that. But, basically he said that right now the system is not sustainable. It's had a number of years of continuous losses, about 15. He feels that it's going to be very difficult to pay off the liability, the current situations that face the fund right now. So I think we need to be aware as we move forward. Some people are saying that, this will be paid off in 10 years. I've heard 7 years. I've heard 5 years. I think until we have a better idea on where we're going to go moving forward, I think it's best for everybody to just say that, it's a liability that we have to pay down. And I think right now we do have from the PSPRS board 20-year or 21-year payoff plan.
Yeah, it's a closed period of 20 years from the 2016 actuarial report.
Okay, and that's changed every year?
Yeah, it's a closed period, so next year it'll be 19 and so on.
Okay.
18.
So, I think right now we know that for a fact. They've given us a very specific payoff plan, and I think that's the one that we have to go with until we can definitely ascertain that there is a program out there that might be able to pay it off earlier. But I think the other thing too is I want to make sure that everybody understands that, we have concerns with the system. We do not have concerns with the firemen and the policemen getting the benefits that they've earned. And so I want to make sure that everybody understands that and that we're looking at the system. I was just down at the legislature recently and also with the League of Cities and Towns. And we're trying to get this on the legislators' agenda, get them looking at it. I think we're going to see some changes coming out here shortly. I'm not going to say what they are until it's actually announced from the legislature. But obviously, this is going to be the way we're going to have to tackle this is from two sides. It's going to have to be from the state side and what they can do, and also we're going to have to look at what we can do locally because we do have an unfunded liability that's not going to go away. The state's not going to pay for it. They may give us some help in the future. I've heard things about, possibly some matching funds. If we provide money over what we normally have to pay off in a year, and we were able to pay off some additional funding, that they might match it. But that's still way up in the air. Nobody's ever made that decision. But, things of that nature might be able to have some validity in the future. So what I want to do is make sure as we move forward, people understand that we're looking at options. We've looked at about 14 options. I think we've picked 6 of those right now we think have good likelihood. And I think there's still some other options out there that we need to take a look at. I know the city manager has received some additional information and from, excuse me, the Reason Foundation that he's taken a look at. Some of those options, of course, might not be things that we can do short term, such as leases on some of our services. Basically, is what it is. And by the time you would actually be able to work through that and talk about it and come up with a lease, probably nothing could be done this year. So, I think we need to do something this year. We're going to try and come up with some kind of plan, and I just want to make sure that if we move forward, that we try and always make sure that what we say has validity and fact. And I think that's important because You know, if we're going to get the voters to move forward and be in concert with us and agree to this on a ballot measure, if it comes to that, we need to know that they're getting the absolute truth as we know it, and that, you know, they have trust and confidence in us and what we're saying. So the other thing, of course, on this is going to be communication. As you know, some of you may know, maybe not all of you were here when we had Barry Aarons up here, but he indicated communication is going to be important. He indicated that we should be possibly looking at a survey of the voters to see if what the appetite is on various ideas that we might have. And I think we need to pursue that. I've talked to the city manager, and I think John Heine is working with a company right now that could probably do that for us. They seem to be a pretty reputable company. We'd have to come up, of course, with the options and things like that the people could look at. But again, I just want to try and make everybody understand this is a complex subject. There's a lot of moving parts. We have not come to an agreement yet on where we need to move. You know, I have people come to me saying that, you know, you need to do something right now, and I've had other people come to me and say, you know, I'm not going to support I'm a small business person. I'm not going to support a tax increase. I've had people in the large ticket items come to me and say I would only agree to it if it's stratified, so it doesn't affect me. There's a plethora of ideas out there. I mean, they go from one range to the other. So we need to start to coalesce here as a council on a very definitive plan, and then we still need to start bringing everybody together in the public and making them understand where we want to go, why we need to get there, and that's going to be important that we do that through our communication plan. Based on my opening comments, I guess I got a couple statements here, so I'll go ahead and go to Councilman Blair.
Thank you, Mayor. I have two things. Number one, you talked about the closed system of 20 years. Mark, do you have any idea or put your arms around what the interest rate would be on that for 20 years?
Well, again, these are actuarially figured liabilities, so there is no interest rate. There's an assumed earnings rate that is used to discount that future cash flow.
Okay.
So it's not a mortgage. You can't assign a specific interest rate to it. The assumed earnings rate, which is used as a discount rate, is 7.5 in 2016. It's going to go to 7.4 in the 2017 actuarial.
So based upon unfunded balance, we would have an interest we're paying every year based upon the debt not being paid.
No, it's the discount rate on that range of liabilities. Obviously, the interest that you're missing out on is whatever the trust earns.
Okay. And the other thing is, and I just have to bring it up, so John, hold your seat down. From my standpoint, I talked with a gentleman from the Reasons Foundation, and he made it very clear that we need to get the state's attention. And I know the mayor's kind of gone on a way of wanting to get the state's attention by using our representatives. I believe, based upon being a charter city, that we should sue the state of Arizona on many levels. Number one, we're a chartered city, and they gave us this debt, for one. Number two, they took away our opportunity to charge an impact fee for public safety. Number three, we can't charge for public safety on our water bill like we do with our water or sewer. And I believe, the simple thing of us having to pay our taxes now, our 2% tax, and having it to pay to the state of Arizona with this new law, they've overstepped our charter many times. From my understanding, until we stand up and say we're going to sue the state of Arizona, we're not going to get anybody's attention. So I guess my question here to this body is the fact that we need, at least I feel this way, that we need to be aggressive about getting our autonomy back as a chartered community and file this lawsuit against the state of Arizona. Make Mr. Varanovich rule upon whether the lawsuit has merit, because I think that's the way it's done, and then see where we go from here. But I think just to take an apple core and have it shoved down our throat and not like it, and then we don't do anything about it, I think is wrong. I mean, we stood up about the election cycles being combined, and we won against that one. And I don't know why we sit here, what's going to affect this community as well as all the rest of the communities in the state of Arizona with this PRS, why we don't get the state of Arizona's attention to take it on as a state problem and not as an individual community problem. It just is beyond me that we don't file a lawsuit against them. So that's my piece. And
Do you want to respond to that, or?
I prefer not to.
Okay, good. We're moving right down the line here, so we got Councilman Shiska next.
Thank you, Mayor. You know, we could wander around in the weeds for a long time. And people put us here to be leaders. I think that the time for playing Mother May I is long gone. I think that we should put our big boy pants on and get out there with a .75 for August 29th. And if we tell a compelling story to the folks, I think that they'll vote for it. I think that if we could wait for 1,000 different reasons, but it's not getting anything done. We need to be decisive, and we need to tell a compelling story, and we need to get it done, because that's what people expect.
sorry.
Councilwoman Wilcox.
Thank you, Mayor. On almost every meeting, you've referred to the Reason Foundation. And at your town hall, which was not approved by the City Council as a whole or sanctioned by the council, you brought in a so-called expert from the Reason Foundation. We don't know if he's really an expert or not. He made a presentation with a lot of dramatic language in it that made us all feel like we're doomed to hell if we don't do something. But there are many experts out there, and I think we don't need to go to outside think tanks. We are an independent charter city, and we have a lot of smart people in this community, a lot of whom were invited to our stakeholders meeting and gave us their ideas. What we really need to look at is what this community will tolerate. We already know what the problem is. We know that we have an unfunded liability that we have to pay down. And we've been told that by the PSPRS board. We know that we need to work with the legislature in a dual track, or as Barry suggested, a triple track, including communication with our voters. But I would say take the think tanks out of the mix. Let us determine our own solutions here in Prescott.
Well, I'll just say, I always think one of the things I learned in the military was that the more information you had, the better decision you made. So I'll leave that up to the voters to make that decision. You didn't have anything?
Well, you said you were going down, and then you stopped with you.
Well,
I mean,
I was going to you next, but
yeah, you weren't the
you
end.
didn't punch in here, so
well,
I guess
I didn't know that I had to.
I guess I have to go to Councilwoman Orr.
By your leadership role, you said I'm going right on down the deal. Go back to what Councilman Blair was references. We had a plan. The plan was a 20-year deal. We bought into that plan back in 16 or whatever the deal was. We haven't missed a payment on the plan. We haven't done anything wrong on the plan. What I do know is if we mandate a 0.75, what we're doing is on top of the plan that we had already presented and agreed to follow, over a period of 10 years, 0.75 is equivocal. It's equal to $9.75 million a year, or $97.5 million. I'm not so sure, having watched us go from having participated at $45.5 million over the last 10 years, just to realize that now our liability is 78 point whatever million, that I would agree to spending another 95.5 million. So right now, I'm not saying I'm not wanting to do anything. We've already done something. We agreed on the 20-year payoff. That's what we agreed to do. Now, one of the things I've had trouble this whole time wrapping my hands around, is an actuarial is not a real number. It's something that may happen or may not happen. There is no such thing as interest. What it is it's based on performance or non-performance. So it's very difficult because it's a moving target. One of the things we did agree to do was that every year we would pay what we were told was due. I happen to agree with Blair that it irritates me that the state's telling us this. I don't disagree that it's not, that we may have to sue the state, but I don't know to what end that would do. I mean, I would, again, on something of that nature, because I'm here to serve all the citizens of Prescott, whatever we do with the state impacts all the citizens of Prescott and our ability to work with the state on behalf of all the citizens of Prescott. And I, again, would defer to our legal department as to maybe this is a conversation that needs to be had in a different scenario than on the open floor of public debate in the hallowed walls of freedom, so to speak. I would rather just pass it on to Billy.
Thank you. Thanks for that, Mayor Pro Tem. No.
Councilwoman Orr.
Well, I understand Steve's position on this, and I do think there's been state overreach. I mean, we listened to Tyler today go through a complete list of proposed state overreaches, and I do think there's some validity to try to get an opinion on some of the state overreach. So, yeah, we should think about that.
And I think the reason, just real quick, why I bring it up is, you got to get their attention. How are you going to get their attention? And
enough already.
Really, the bottom line is it's an election year next year for the governor of the state of Arizona. Let's get his attention. We're up here talking about this every week. Our police officers and our fire guys are still out there working. They don't know where the end is based upon us trying to find the end. Why doesn't the state do something about correcting their own problem that they foisted upon us? That's my opinion.
Well, and then I want to make sure that I say this clearly because I don't want it to be misinterpreted. I agree with Steve. We were elected to represent the citizens of Prescott. We have studied this issue upside down, inside out. If we don't know, we know what the problem is, and we have a solution. Now, we don't have a crystal ball. We don't know what the economy will do a year from now, but we do know. Mark, can you put up that slide that shows how our payment has gone on and we've met that payment each time? It's the blue bars.
Sure.
The one of 15,000.
Yeah. It's the graph that does separate because of the 19. I'm sorry, I should have bought my hard copy.
Oh, that wasn't the PowerPoint. You remember when we did
Yeah, it was the one that then we added to it at the end. Remember we did the news?
I remember the graph. I just didn't.
It's January
have it.
24th.
January 24th. Yeah.
Well, even if you put up the last one that we did last week, that I can use that one.
January.
And I'm sorry, I should have brought a hard copy.
I'm sorry. Let me find it here. The 7th?
Okay.
I don't think it was the 7th. 7th was on borrowing.
It's kind of in the beginning. All right, go to that one.
That one?
Go to that one. Each one of those bars is a year. And just look, if we continue to do nothing, and I know we're working with the legislature, we're going to look at many different options, but had something been done earlier, we would not be in the situation that we're in now. For us to continue to do nothing, look at that red line and where that's going. That's not acting now. And I don't think that's what our citizens want, because we know what that's going to result in regard to services for our city. We have 4 main goals in our strategic plan to take care of our general fund. And that's what we're working on now. We have been spending a lot of time about the airport, economic development, tourism. We've been spending a lot of time about quality of life issues. But until we take care of this problem, those others are not going to fall in line because we will continue to see things deteriorate within our city. And I, for one, Mayor, I so respect what you're saying on this, but I really would like to suggest that we direct staff to come back next week with language for ballot. Looking at a 0.75 with a pay down, with a sunset in 10 years, because we can see with a 0.75 that we start to take care of this problem, that within, by 2028, we should have paid this down enough to have it manageable within our general fund. I just don't know why we would not move forward, because, as you said, communication is a big part of this. People are confused out there. I'm an educator. It takes a long time to educate people on difficult things like this. If we're talking about going to the ballot on August 29th, we need to take this time for the next 5 months to get our act together, get our message together, to go out there and, as Steve Shiska said, to tell our story, because this story, to me, says, let's save our city. And if someone today said, bankruptcy is not such a bad idea, I think it's a terrible idea. And I don't think we ought to even be entertaining that idea. So, Mayor, I guess I would just like to suggest that we direct staff to come back with ballot language.
Well, I agree that the PSPRS is a long pole in the tent, obviously. I think, I'd have to ask the city manager if he feels that we've explored all the options and he feels that, this is the exact way we need to go, and it's time to start working on ballot language.
Wait, this L's not done yet.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mayor, could I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Steve, I agree with you. We need to do something, and I don't want to make John work harder than he has to, but we need to come up with something, and that would send them a message, no matter what message that is, whether it's smoke messages or the finger, something. Steve Shiska, I agree with you. We need to just get it done. And Gene and Mayor, we all have ideas that we need to go forward on, whether it's with the state, moving it that way, whether it's through a lawsuit. Jim, I understand you want perpetuity and trying to take care of the thing in the long term, but I think it's the wrong time right now. I think we put this 0.75 in, sunsets in 10 years, whether the problem's resolved or not. Definitely we know the problem won't be as big as it will be in 10 years as it is now. I've said this before. I guess you got to ask yourself a question. We're gonna wait and do nothing, knowing the inevitable, and maybe the state can do something and help us out. But you have to ask yourself an honest question. Why did all of us move here and stay here if we were born here and want to stay here? It's what we have. And to do nothing, we won't have it. That's what you got to end. Are we willing as a community, willing to take it upon ourselves right now or in the coming months and do something ourselves instead of waiting for somebody else to do it for us? So I agree with Billy. I think we get language together. All these other 6 items is about paying it down, that initial part. In the next 5 months, we can go to the public saying we've sold this land. We're going to use X amount from the reserves if that's what we decide as a council. Noel and David are doing this. Karen is doing this. And we bring it as a package deal leading up to that August 29th election, my opinion.
Okay, before we go to city manager, I just want to say that, I never said we're not going to do anything. I said there's going to be a 2-track system here, basically legal and or legislative and local. So, and I said we're going to do something this year. So I don't want anybody to get the idea out there that we're not going to do anything. Mayor Pro Tem, you wanted to punch in before?
Yeah, thanks. $45.5 million in my book is not doing nothing. I find that as an insult. That was taxpayer monies in the city of Prescott. That was their money, not yours. that was doing something. Now, was it enough? I don't know. Have we seen one of these little blue charts on what it means when we dipped into the reserve? No, because staff hasn't done it yet. We've asked for it no less than 3-4 times. What happens if instead of the so-called elusive 68 or 78 million dollars, now you're looking at 50 or 60 million dollars? We haven't seen that yet. So the ballot language is premature until you know what the actual something is. I'm not so sure I want to go out and ask the public, do you want to borrow another $95 million, not knowing if we can do it with $65 million?
City Manager?
Mayor Pro Tem, one of the things we have on the agenda is a presentation about usage of the reserve.
I understand that, and week after week we stand here and go through this, and it hasn't been on here yet. And every week we've seen one picture, the selected picture that somebody wanted to show us. But what we haven't seen is what other people have asked for. And all I'm suggesting to you is maybe 7.5 wouldn't be 7.5. Maybe 10 wouldn't be 10. It might be different if all the chits were in the picture.
I think a lot of the things we've talked about, whether it's reserve usage, selling surplus property, finding ways to have alternate service delivery, those items are going to be around the margin, and they're going to help to some level. But the issue in its totality, the $78 million, is not going to be addressed by one of those. It's going to be addressed by a referendum, whether the voters vote yes or no on a sales tax measure. There's no other way to raise that kind of cash.
And while I appreciate that, you want the voters to know we went to all measures. And I don't think that we have.
I totally agree with you that we need to exhaust all the things around the margins to demonstrate to the public that we have done our due diligence. And I think that process needs to continue.
I've got a problem with trying to understand this banter back and forth, because if you ask three quarters or 1%, 10 years or before when it's paid off, you can take all these things around the margin and add it into the pie.
That's
so
exactly.
To me, it's a non-starter for me, because I'm asking the public to pay this debt 10 years or before, depending on what mechanism we use. Right. I think that's pretty simple. Yeah.
But I think you've selected a date, and you need to come up with a measure. I don't think you have. I think you have a finite period of time where you can get this thing over the finish line. I don't know that it has to be today, but it certainly needs to be sooner rather than later.
Councilman Jessica.
Thank you, Mayor. Now, we're bandying about 20 years, but didn't the previous council go for a 0.55 for almost 20 years in order to pay down this debt, and that didn't succeed?
10.
And so I'm not sure what 20 years we're talking about, but maybe Mark can help me out here.
Sure. The 20 years, I guess I assumed the 20-year period comes from the actuarial amortization period of the unfunded liability. It's what the state has, the state board, PSPRS board, decided to amortize the unfunded liability over. That is what this red line, of course my laser is not working, that is what the red line shows. If we pay it out over the 20 years, our expenses are projected to proceed up that red line. To answer Councilman Lamerson's question, we have put on payoffs on this graph right here. The green bar is if we take $4 million out of reserves and pay it down. We're going to talk about more of that in the presentation today.
So maybe there is a 20-year out there, but that doesn't preclude the increases in payments every year.
They will be needed to meet that 20-year.
Yeah, so it's not like we can pay what we're paying right now and meet that 20-year.
No, absolutely not. That's why the red bar.
And that's what we're trying to get rid of, is the problem with the general fund, which will break us if we don't do something.
Yes.
Okay, out of 14 options, like we said, we took out, we only kept 6 of them. We've talked about a couple of those at previous meetings. I think we got 2 more options we're going to be talking about today. Is that correct?
It is, and Mark's going to discuss reserve usage, and I have a slide presentation on alternative service delivery.
Okay.
Yeah, if they're, all right. Well, we will proceed, and again, as we've already discussed, so we can go through some of these slides quicker, the council narrowed down the 14 some options that they looked at to the 6 that we have on the screen. We did borrowing, selling unneeded property, which the number 2 is still in progress and council is still working on, and so is staff. Today we're going to look at using reserves to pay down the liability. The other options several are covered in the manager's presentation today as well. So as we get into this, and Mayor, excellent point that we need to use consistent numbers, a lot of different numbers floating around out there. So I thought a good way to start this presentation today would be to talk about what public safety costs the city and how we pay for it, and then we can talk about the reserves. So I have here a schedule of the 2017 expenditures for public safety, a column for fire, column for police, and for the total public safety. And as you can see, the total budget for public safety operating budget is $26,572,000. Of that, $6.3 million is the PSPRS cost, and of that, 5.3 of that is that payment of the unfunded liability. $1 million of that is what is your standard every year cost for having employees and a pension going forward. So if you didn't have the 5.3, the total operating budget for public safety would be 21.2 million, roughly. Then again, there's capital items there. I also provided some detail of the different things that are charged for public safety, our share of the dispatch center, facilities charges, fleet maintenance, IT, and the other things there. Okay, looking at that amount.
Where'd you get to 21 million?
21 million is the 26,572,000 minus the 5.3 million that's associated with the pay down of the unfunded liability to give you the $21.2 million roughly of what the operating budget would be for public safety without the additional pension cost of the unfunded liability amortization.
Okay, and what's the capital line? What's that all about?
Those are capital projects that are out there. Some are grant related and won't happen or will happen, but those are capital, not recurring operating costs. I did that just so that the schedule could tie out to the adopted budget.
Okay, so this 28,363 here, that's total public safety. That's what it's going to cost us in 2017?
Yes, that's what was budgeted. Some of the, like I say, some of those capital were capital grants that are hopeful to get, but may not come. So if we want to look at where does that the 28.363 million come from, the next slide shows where the funding is. And the big blue sections, we have the fire graph and the police graph. The big blue sections are from what's called the tax base, or the general tax base. About $21.6 million comes from that general tax base. Then we have the licenses and permits that are charged. We have charges for services, which relate to something that was on the agenda earlier, the contract with the Yavapai Indian Tribe for fire protection. And then you have the revenue from parking tickets, speeding tickets, and all those tickets at about $353,000. And then you have the SAFER grant and other grants. And a lot of those other grants may not come about, but they're in there, and we are trying to get them to take care of capital needs. And then, of course, the enterprise fund is charged for the ARF operation.
So if we don't get those grants, does that mean we're going to have to come up with that funding out of the general fund?
It means the capital will have to go into the 5-year capital plan at some point. Probably would not get replaced as quickly as needed. Also, some of the other operating costs there are things that if we don't get the money for, we won't do, like DUI checkpoints and other grants that the police department and fire department put in for.
Okay, so again, I'm not sure you answered my question. If we don't get the grants, then we're going to have to fund this out of the general fund.
If you don't get all the grants, some of the things that need to happen this year or next year will have to come out of the general fund. A lot of these things are long-term capital replacements that if we don't get the grants this year, we'll try again next year. Eventually, if we never get the grants, yes, they will have to fall onto the 5-year capital plan.
Okay.
And other ones that are operating are not that way. There are special operations or enforcements that just will not happen. So looking at the revenues, which is a question that comes up, where does this funding come from? We only get $14 million in sales tax. How do we come up with the $21.6 million, the tax base? Well, the city charter, state law provides for the city to assess revenues and to get a share of the state revenues. Those revenues are classified as restricted or unrestricted. Now, unrestricted revenues can be used for any general governmental purpose. They include our general sales tax, or 1%, our share of the state share sales tax, the governmental, I actually have them on the next slide, the franchise tax, the primary tax, property tax, the share of the 3 state revenues, income, privilege, and license tax, and then our miscellaneous revenue in the general fund, which deals with rents and cell phone or cell tower rents and those type of things, interest earnings, that type of stuff. So we have a tax base, a general tax base that can be used for any governmental purpose of $30 million. Then we have another $80 million in revenues that are specific and restricted. Either they're grants, they're water revenues, wastewater revenues, different revenues that have a specific purpose and can only be used for a specific program. So of that allocation, of that $30 million, how do we allocate it? We allocate it during the budget process. We talk about this at our budget workshop every year. This is how it was allocated in 2007. 41.5% of it went to police, 30.5% to fire, recreation, library, economic development, general governmental, and then we have the city's share of grant matches and support to the airport for operations. That's how that $30 million was separated and spread in the 2017 budget. Any questions on the funding and the revenue stuff? I just wanted to get the numbers out there because we hear a lot of different numbers about what public safety costs and what those things are.
If indeed we do come up with ballot language that restricts how the money's spent, going back to a scenario that the mayor was referencing, if we don't come up with certain dollars, if these grants go away or this happens or that, you got to go into the general fund. The money that's generated with the whatever the number is in the ballot language, that would be restricted, and you couldn't just go to that for general delivery.
Correct. It would be restricted to pay off, as the council's discussed, I'm assuming, the PSPRS obligation. That will free up more of these general tax revenues that are currently being used to pay that. So if it does free up a portion of that $30 million, that would be available to take care of the SAFER grant when it's not renewed and we are unable to maintain staffing in the fire departments or whatever.
Okay, I got a question.
Okay.
We get about $14 million from 1%, correct?
14.9 in the 2017 budget.
Okay. But that's what we're getting right now. In the past, we've gotten much lower than that. Is that correct?
We've gotten lower than that.
Like during the downturn, we were not making anywhere close to the 14 million, right?
Right. It was in the 13 million. It was about $1 million less in the downturn.
Okay.
That was the.
So if let's say we take the
downturn.
1 cent or the 1%, that's about 14.9. And what would we make off of 0.75?
Around $10 million.
Okay. So that gives us almost 25 million, right?
Yes.
Okay. And what is police and fire costing us right now? I think you told me that it's like 23.9 million right now or something.
Their operating budget is the 26,572,000. It's on slide 4.
Okay. So it sounds like the 1 3/4 is just what we need to pay for police and fire. Because the other cent goes towards street, so we can't even consider that, right?
Correct.
Okay. So I guess what I'm wondering is 0.75 enough?
Well, again, we have these other revenues, the franchise tax, the primary property tax, the city's share of state income tax, state privilege tax, and vehicle license tax.
Okay.
All of which can be used for governmental purpose.
30 million.
So
Yeah.
$30 million.
But if we lose any of that based on maybe the construction sales tax going away, or we lose the sales tax on rentals, are we still going to have enough to run the general government with 7.75?
Well, depending on, there's numerous things we could lose in the future. I mean, we can only go with what we know today. Obviously, any loss significant like the construction sales tax or the residential rental or the food tax would be a significant hit to the general fund.
Yeah, I understand that, but I'm just thinking, we don't know if we're going to get grants in the future either.
That is
Is
true.
that correct?
Correct.
And so I think, we have to keep this in mind, that if we don't get the grants and if we maybe lose some more revenue streams from the legislature, all I'm looking at is 0.75 going to be enough then? Or are we looking at possibly more?
I can't really speculate too much what the future holds for loss of revenues. I mean, I can only go based on what the law is today and what the projections of the economic trend is.
Okay, so I guess we should just ignore that, correct?
I don't think we ignore anything, but it's hard for me to say in 2019 we're going to lose residential rental tax. I mean, I don't know if we're going to lose that or construction. That's up to the state legislature.
And just like with the SAFER grant, we don't know if we'll get that continually either. I mean,
The SAFER grant.
we got it right now for 2 years, right?
Correct.
Okay, so that will help out somewhat.
For 2 years.
Yeah. Okay, thanks.
So with that, we can get into the reserves, the question that we're talking about today. So obviously using the reserves, just like the debts, using reserve to pay down the unfunded liability will reduce our liability. Again, does not relieve us from future liability from the difference in the actuarial assumptions. It is an actuarial. I'm sorry that we don't have any finite definite number on that, but it is the way pensions work and how they are run. Unassigned revenues are the unassigned reserves come from accumulation of funds from revenues exceeding budget or expenditures coming in below budget in the general fund. In general, revenue, these reserves are not recurring. So once you use them, if you use 10 million of them this year, you're not going to have that 10 million for next year. They accumulate slowly over time. So that's something to keep in mind. Large one-time lump sum payments to pay down the PSPRS, as we talked about last week, put you subject to the market conditions at that point in time. That's either a good thing or a bad thing, depending on what the market does. Again, more multiple payments over time will reduce that impact of market risk on these payment payoffs.
Mark, what do you recommend as a safe amount to use from reserves?
On our next slide, we have the reserves. Might be a better place to look at that. But on the multiple payments, during the annual budget process, when we look at the revenues, we look at what the state legislature is doing to us in that year. I hate to say it like that, but it seems like that's the way it works with the state legislature. That's a good time to look at the reserves and how much the council wants to allocate to pay down the PSPRS liability. It's a good annual review as an ongoing multiple payment to help bring this liability down where it can be managed in the general fund. So, Councilwoman, the next slide here shows the reserves. This is a slide we looked at a few meetings ago.
We got a question here from Councilman Zell.
Thank you, Mayor. Mark, just anecdotally, from your knowledge, I don't need exact numbers. How many years in a row, starting from last year past, have we had excess to feed into the reserves?
We have had excess the last couple of years. It's always been above the projected amount, whether it went up or not, but it's small. It's a couple 100,000 this year, 500,000 that year, and that's what I'm saying. They're like a savings account. They
Well, I get
accumulate
that.
slowly.
I understand what you're saying,
Yeah.
but I guess my point is, were we feeding into that in the good times and bad times of the past 10 years?
It was a lot less in the bad times,
But we were
but
feeding
because
into
of the actions council took to cut services and cut expenses, we were able to maintain our reserves through the bad times.
But we were still feeding into it.
I'm not sure if we fed into them every year, but we did maintain them. They did not take a significant hit.
Okay.
And again, I think every year is a great time to look at it when we can put up the reserves like we have on the screen and say, well, we have 13 million unassigned. You know, council wants to put 4 million or 6 million towards the liability this year to help bring it down quicker, or whatever. Or no, we have to look at a new fire truck next year or something. We need to use it for that. I mean, that's why it's good to look at every year instead of trying to make a policy decision now for the next several years.
Okay, thank you.
You could make a balloon payment and then make annual payments out of the reserve.
Yeah, I mean, you could make a bigger payment this year than next year, or a bigger payment next year than this year. However, however it's decided as we look at all the expenses for the next fiscal year.
Councilman Shiska.
Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate that. Mark, from that one graph where we paid $4 million and it showed the, I think it was the green line or whatever it was, can you go back to that graph?
Probably.
Okay. You know, I have to be honest with you, from my standpoint, it doesn't look like it makes a whole hell of a lot of difference
The 4 million.
in that situation. And I think that the reserve is much more valuable than to cover things like not getting a SAFER grant 1 year, and to cover things that may happen but may not happen. I just don't think it looks like it's that big of a difference to put all of our eggs in that basket. I think that we need to commit to making sure that we continue to pay our obligations, and if it takes using the reserve on an as-needed basis, that's the way I think we ought to use it.
And I agree with Steve on that. You said in the past, we get cut services, we got eliminated personnel. We were able to keep from going into the reserves very much, if at all, because we were able to reduce costs. But I think today, we're at the bottom level of reducing costs with our staffing. I don't think we want to cut services anymore. I think we've already cut the police force too far. We might even need to look at, adding to the police force, because we've already had it reported in the paper that, they're under stress, they're fatigued, they're committing a lot of overtime because of the cuts we've taken in the police in the past. So, I'm not sure we're going to be able to take any further cuts. So I agree with Steve. What we may be looking at is, we can't make cuts and we do have a downturn, or we have some unknown eventuality in the future, we might have to dip into the reserve. So I kind of agree with you. I think we probably need to try and preserve at least some kind of safety level, maybe even above the $7 million we're required to by the state.
Always a good idea to have that safety level, especially if you want to start, kind of funding not emergency operations, but operations that aren't funded by current.
Councilwoman Orr has a question. Or
Yes,
comment.
I would agree with that too. When we did that graph, we put 4 million, because I don't know if you remember, Mayor, you said you would want to go over 5, even when we were just talking about using reserves. And I think that's a better strategy. So then if we would need, because there might be an economic downturn, that would be a better use of reserves. Plus, we are going to have, hopefully, revenue coming in from the property that we will be looking at and selling. And so that could go toward reserve or toward PSPRS, unfunded liability, and whichever one then the council decides at that time. And we can be just smarter about it. Rather
Exactly.
than committing, that amount of money. Let's just be smarter at the time that it happens. And
Well, an excellent point. I think that's why it's a good idea to do this every year during the budget process when we pull up the projections and the estimated needs for council to make that decision, whether they want to make a supplemental payment that year or not.
And I think maybe for the public's benefit, maybe even for the people here up on the dais, but I think the people that we have right now in the SAFER grant, they're being paid by the SAFER grant. So the funding that we had in the budget this year for them should go over to reserves, right? Unless there's operational conditions that they have to be used for.
It was allocated. It was allocated to other needs like grant matches and those things, which would have normally come out of reserves. So in a sense, it did go to reserves.
So you said it did go to reserves essentially?
Essentially.
Yeah. And isn't that also true with, some of the recent staff reductions we had in department level? I think some of that money that will not be paid out for the remainder of the year could go to reserves too.
It will, as we look at the budget and actual activity comes in below budget, it would go to reserves.
So we should see some growth again in reserves this year.
Yes. And again, when we do the budget workshops, we'll have projections of that, and at that time, council may want to make a lump sum. I'm not saying payments are a bad idea. I'm just saying to try to amass a large sum to do one lump sum is not probably as good as idea as putting $2 million a year or $4 million a year additional into it, as you see if reserves are maintaining or how fast they're falling.
Yeah, Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you. Since we're kicking around ideas, keeps bringing me back to dedicated revenue source for police and fire. To your most basic services that you can get, public safety. All right? I don't understand why we don't sit here and have as much conversation and collective thought process with how do we get to assuring police and fire without having to depend on grants and shared revenues and everything else that over the years have demonstrated to be flawed. State sweeps it when they want to sweep it, and then you get stuck. We just heard a perfect example up there from you. I don't know why we wouldn't talk about dedicating the first 1.5, first 1.75 to police and fire. That's what it works. 14 million and 975 is 2375. That's the 24 million we're talking about O&M. And then the other stuff is what you put up for public scrutiny every year, not your police and your fire. I just throw that out. We're sitting here talking about it. I think you need to have a permanent funding source so that police and fire are not put in this dilemma every year.
So when you say permanent, you mean dedicated?
That's right.
Yeah,
Dedicated, reserved, whatever you want to call it.
Okay. Councilwoman Wilcox.
This discussion about using reserves brings me back to a year ago when we had mid-year budget cuts. And we froze positions. We're not going to fill vacant positions in police and fire. We browned out stations. We closed the library on Sunday. We cut staffing. Why did we do all that if we could have used reserves to carry us through?
Reserves are never a good thing to build your operations around on the long term. Obviously, if you think there's the downturn or the shortfall in operating revenues is short term, you could use reserves to span that time. But at the mid-year budget cut time, we had no idea of going for a revenue. We had no idea that the shortfall was a short-term thing. That's why operations were cut to live within the operating revenue that was projected.
So the idea of using reserve goes hand in hand with the prospect of having additional revenue source.
That's
through
correct.
Sales tax.
Yes.
Okay.
Councilwoman Orr.
So Mark, can we pay toward the unfunded liability at any time? I mean, is it a set payment? Or
No,
can we
yes.
pay?
We can, you can pay. You need to make it a minimum year payments
Right.
each payroll for the calculation on
But
the
let's say
payroll.
we sold a piece of property, then we could take that money and pay it any time?
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
Oh, it was interesting. I talked to
Anytime. we need to notify PSPRS, but whenever you do that. And, some of the committee ideas from the league's pension committee were to make your whole year's PSPRS payment on July 1. That way you have the whole year of interest earnings or interest losses. I mean, yes, we can make payments whenever you want.
Just an interesting note, I was talking to PV city manager yesterday, and they said they have been able to generate about $900,000 that they would like to put out against their PSPRS liability. But they said right now, since the PSPRS's fund is trending negatively, using his words, he said they're not going to commit the money right now. So he said if they ever start to trend positively, they'll put the money in. So I think that's one of the things we'd have to look at if we decide to put any money in. So
definitely a good point, but just as an FYI, the last PSPRS investment report, which came out in December for the PSPRS statewide board, showed that they're about 5.5 or 6% earnings for the fiscal year to date. So yeah, they were low last fiscal year. Yeah. The next slide, it's not as pretty as the graph with the lines, but for Council or Mayor Pro Tem Lamerson's question, we have a $10 million pay down on this one as well. What would that do? It would reduce that annual payment from the 7.6 million to 6.7. So it'd be about $900,000 less a year, but again, it would take pretty much all of your unfunded or unassigned reserve balance to do that. Would decrease our liability to 67 million, make us 40% funded as opposed to the 31 that we are now. Again, these were just 3 different scenarios we ran, staying with the 20-year amortization, 78.5, and the payments, $4 million pay down and $10 million pay down. Be glad to run any other scenarios the council wants, but
No, I think it's important for the public to see that we looked at 10 and we looked at 4, and guess what? You'd rather keep the 10 on hand while paying on the 4.
Well, Mayor, if I can, I think what I heard, especially from you, Mayor, and I agree 100%, that if we keep the money in the rainy day fund, let's say we make 4 sales of property within the next 6 months, we put that $2 million in our rainy day fund at any given time, especially if the market's functioning well, we can put that $2 million, like we said we were going to do, towards the principal. So it doesn't preclude us from doing anything. And I'd hate like hell to pull that money down out of the rainy day fund to where we're less than, 8 or 10%, and we end up with an issue. I like the savings bank that's in there.
Well, and I don't even know that there's anything wrong with a goal over a 10-year levy of sales tax that you shoot that use 10 million, right, that you save money along and along, and that you shoot for something that it's a council goal going forward to reach that over the course of the levy. Do you, Mark?
You know what, based upon what he said, though, I want to address what Jim said, because he keeps saying it, and I agree that if we make a decision as a council that we always leave 12 million in the rainy day fund, $1 million a month for 12 months, and anything above and beyond that every single year in the budget process, whether it's a selling of property or excess from whatever the case may be, then we pay that additional down towards the principal. And if we sunset the 3/4% prior to 10 years and it happens to be 7 because we've done well, then so be it. And then we can handle that $2 million a year in the PSPRS payment as we go along. Is that a correct statement?
Yeah, and just to clarify, I need to get a laser pointer in here. This 6.65, that's the 20% reserve. So that's basically the reserve requirement. So if you took another, 5.4 out of this to make that the 12 million that you were talking about, or the council could even change that reserve policy to be 12 million. That reserve operating policy is set by council. So the council wants to change
what everybody's sitting here wanting to know is what we're telling the public. So I think we need to be firm on what our reserve is, and be firm on anything over that goes in the budget year every year to pay off the principal to PSPRS. And I think that's pretty easy for the public to understand.
Councilman Lozelle.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I agree about a reserve fund, and it's the right thing to do. But what we got to realize also, this money here is not our money. This is the public's money. And I feel like sometimes we're hoarding it. And we need to use some of it to benefit the public to put it in there. And to just sit there and say, well, this could happen, this couldn't happen. It's like we're starving and we've got a wheat crop right out front, out our back door. So we got to use some of this to feed us.
But again, Jean, when she made the comment, if we hit a low and we have that 12 million, we've been making our payments to PSPRS. We paid down the debt, and we have the downturn of the economy at the end of the year. Instead of laying people off at mid-year, then we have that reserve fund of 12 million to keep the library or keep these things afloat for another 6 months, year, whatever the case may be. But we don't go out and throw all of our money.
And I never suggest we do, but we got to show good faith that we're doing all these different multi-pronged approaches at this.
And I think that's the best way to handle it. Yep.
You see, it's not like paying down a mortgage.
I understand, but Steve, I guess my point is, we've been looking at this for 2 years and we barely understand it. And the folks out there that are watching this or reading this or just talking to us, it's even the comprehension is even lower. And so we've got to show to them that I could give them all market statistics in the world and they're going to go, well, what about all this money here? And you talk about actuaries and the vocabulary and the vernacular, which right over my head, let alone me try to explain that to everybody.
Greg, I think what Mark's been trying to tell us is if we make a lump sum payment, say $10 million, because of the actuarial, we could actually lose money on that $10 million.
And I'm not suggesting $10 million. Don't get me wrong.
And so I like Blair and Lamerson's situation of, we establish a certain minimum which we pay off things like a SAFER grant if in fact we have a problem with getting a grant, and then anything above that we put small amounts into PSPRS to. You said, Mark, that as far as I understand, you said that the smaller amounts more often probably is a better situation.
It does limit the risk of a market downturn, wiping out the impact of a large pay down.
Okay, thank you.
Keep going.
All right, that's the end of mine, so I will turn it over to the city manager.
Just to dovetail on everything Mark's just talked about, when we talk about alternative service delivery strategies, some of these would be long-term decisions that could be substantial amounts of money, and some of them are shorter, like some of the things we've already done this year, to save money to put towards PSPRS.
What I'd like to do is take a few minutes to get some public comment, and then we'll move on to yours. How long do you think it's going to take you?
15 minutes.
Okay.
15, 20 minutes.
So we don't get things confused, and we've just talked about this one. Is there any public comment?
Good afternoon. My name is Daniel Matson. Actually, there have been a number of us who have followed it for longer than 2 years. And this freight train's been seen coming down the track for a while. It's only been a couple of years ago that PSPRS let us know just how bad the problem was. But as far as, earlier people were talking about bankruptcy. Bankruptcy really doesn't solve the problem. It's way more bad than good, so I don't think we should ever talk about that. And I am totally in agreement with using reserves to pay down the liability is not worth paying down on reserves. I'd rather have some money in the bank for bad times. And it doesn't have enough of an impact. I would say that the only thing that really helps us with this problem is going to be that sales tax, because the state's tied our hands on anything else, and we really need to do that. And the sooner we start explaining this to people, that's really the only solution we have left. Expecting the state to fix this problem for us, they may make it so that it's not as bad going forward, but I cannot imagine that the state's going to fix this problem going back, and we owe it. if we were trying to do bankruptcy, what we'd be talking about would be cheating our public safety people out of their pension. I can't see any way in the world that I would agree with that at all. So we need to do this. We might as well just get started on doing it. It may be a bitter pill to swallow, but that still leaves us with a lower sales tax than the surrounding area.
That's right.
We're not talking about taxing ourselves out of the market here. We would still be somewhat lower than everybody else, so we're not going to have people flee Prescott to go shop in Prescott Valley where the tax is higher. So we might as well put this on the ballot and start concentrating on convincing people that that's what we have to do. And if the state solves the problem, then by golly, we can retire the tax earlier. But we better get doing this now before we have no city left.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? I guess not.
Well, okay, I'll get into the idea of improving efficiency and effectiveness through alternate service delivery. And I guess the way I broke this up is where are we now, where we could potentially go, and basically that's the breakdown. So, I think it's important, even when you don't face issues like PSPRS, for an organization to examine the way it delivers services. It just makes sense. In fact, it's something we should do on a fairly regular basis for a lot of our services that are provided. So I'd like to talk about some of the things we've done in non-public safety functions already, which most of you know, or all of you know about, but it'd be good for the public to understand. In terms of economic development, we're going to do some contracting out. We've also done some consolidation in terms of reorganization. We've eliminated what'll be 4 department head positions this year. And the savings for those things are things that we should probably send to PSPRS in some capacity. It makes sense. One of the things we did is we eliminated the field and facilities department, and I have to give staff a lot of credit for taking on additional responsibilities. Specifically, Henry's department and Joe Bain's, the functions of that department have been split, where Henry's taken on solid waste and streets, and Joe's taken on fleet and facilities. So what you really had is the disbanding of a department to become more efficient and hopefully more effective and save a significant amount of salary. Also, I think government gets a bad rap, and probably deservedly so, that the answer is always adding bodies. I think you guys will remember in the winter that with code enforcement, the staff solution was not to add bodies. What it was to try to find alternative ways to meet the demands of code enforcement in terms of implementing the 24/7 hotline and adding a secretary instead of a code enforcement official. So we've already made some inroads in terms of changing the way we go about delivering services, and that's going to be an ongoing process that will always be part of what I care about in this organization, is to try to find better ways to provide services. But this is about public safety, so let's talk a little bit about what they've done. And for those of you that were at the mayor's town hall, some of this is revisiting something we've already talked about, so bear with me with that. But I think it's good for the public to know that it wasn't there. Some of the things we've already done. Bullet 1 talks about the COP program. And, the COPs are the Citizens on Patrol, and they provide us very valuable service in terms of crowd management and traffic enforcement. And the program's really grown exponentially since it was implemented. I think it was implemented in 2008 with a handful of volunteers, and now we're up to 35 strong, which I think is significant.
Before you go to the next one, I'd like to talk to Chief Black. Now, these folks that are in the COP, they're not allowed to carry weapons, correct?
Mayor, that's correct.
And so the fact that we're having certified officers putting in a lot of overtime is because you need an officer as a certified officer that has an arm.
That's correct. We use the COPs to help us in non-enforcement functions. They can do traffic control. They're in uniform. They're in a marked car, specifically marked as a COP. but they don't do the same, they don't perform the same sorts of functions that a certified police officer can.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that people out there understand that, you know, I mean, that's a lot of hours and that's a lot of dedication, but it doesn't really replace a certified officer when we need him.
It doesn't, but it does supplement and allow officers to focus on those enforcement measures and the things that a certified police officer is required to do.
Right.
So it does free up their time.
Yep, great, thanks.
And similar to that are bullet points 2 and 3. And again, it's ideas and ways that we can have our law enforcement folks concentrate on law enforcement specific activities, and then the ancillary activities associated with a law enforcement agency are done by non-cops. I think the city attorney contracts with the constable for civil process service. It's a relatively new change in service delivery that I think has been really valuable and has helped free up detectives and officers for other duties. And I think we also have civilians taking reports, and we also have implemented a online reporting system, which I think has been very valuable.
Michael, can I ask,
Yeah.
Is that Ron Williams that we contract with?
I believe that's his name. It's the elected constable from the courthouse
There's a
crossing.
couple, so I wondered if
Yeah, it's the Prescott precinct.
But he also works with the guy down in Kirkland, Dennis.
Dennis.
Yeah,
So-
we contract with the constable's office
Yeah.
versus a
So
particular.
it's just
it's an
not-
IGA with the
Dennis
county.
Just not Ron, it's
Right.
it's other
It's
folks,
really
yeah.
it's you approved a contract with the county or an IGA with the county, $25 per service, and so over time it's a money saver overall when we have to do both criminal and civil subpoenas.
So one thing that's pending that's a really big deal, and we thank council for allowing this purchase and approving it, is the CAD system, which is the computer-aided dispatch. And the real value of this is that it will allow us to triage calls at the dispatcher level when the call comes in. And what that means is the dispatcher will go through bullet points that allow them to ask the right questions, get the right answers, and then send the right apparatus and the right person to the call. So we'll be using scarce resources better, and also it helps with public perception that we hopefully will not have calls where we have too many people, or calls when we don't have enough, and calls where we have the wrong apparatus. I think that from a public perception perspective, that's a big deal in this community, and we need to do a better job of that, and implementing this is going to help with that. Then there's a lot of items that we can consider, and I think you should consider, and then we could have probably discussions about specific items going forward in the not-so-distant future. Here's some additional ways that we can free up officers. We can have contractors serve other subpoenas and warrants. And the other thing you can do is you can have your citizens on patrol do additional tasks over and above what they're doing right now. The city of Mesa allows their citizens on patrol to do accident investigations. So that would be an interesting to look at in terms of freeing up law enforcement officers to concentrate on law enforcement tasks. Also, there's been a lot of discussion about doing a comprehensive analysis of our fleet, not just on the police side, but also on the fire department side. There's actually an outfit out of the valley that does this kind of work, and if it's council's will, we could have them come up here and look at our fleet and make a determination if we're right sized. Do we have the right apparatus? Do we have enough of the right apparatus? So those are things going forward you can consider. And then jumping over to the fire side, there's things that we've already implemented. One of those is the auxiliary corps, which is basically the volunteers. There's 6 folks in it now. I think there's a desire both on the chief side and with the rank and file to expand it. So hopefully we can add some bodies to that. Also, inspections. Right now, I think it's good for the folks in the audience to know that the inspections are actually done by non-firefighters, but their management is done by a firefighter. At some point, you could consider not having the management done by a firefighter. That's something you could consider going forward. And again, in terms of pending items, the CAD benefit is not just on the law enforcement side, it's also on the fire side. And there's a lot of measures that you could consider doing going forward. One of the things that we really need to look at is trying to maximize our emergency medical services in terms of making sure we're getting the most bang for our buck. Could look at an analysis of that. Could look at bringing in a third party to do plans examination functions, which again is not something you need a firefighter to do plans examination. You could certainly contract out. And again, there's some outfits out there in Arizona that do that kind of work.
Mike, also could not our public or our community development,
they could probably take some of that on too. We've had some real good discussions just in the past couple of days. John's been in with me about some of that function going and being transferred to the community development department. So even before you went to a third party, I think you could look at existing resources.
Okay, thank you.
Michael, I'm concerned about number one. Who are our automatic aid partners, and are they as qualified as our EMT people are?
Councilwoman Wilcox, I think that our partners are probably the ambulance service and the like. And you would have to make the determination that the other people providing services are of a quality you would want before you would change the service. But again, these are just things to consider a further council discussion on going forward, and there may not be the will to do that specific item. These are just things that theoretically going forward you could consider. Additionally, one of the things that I would think that we could really look at seriously is we have 3 schools of higher learning here, and I think there would be some interesting ways to tap into the student pool to provide a level of professional services for a finite period of time. Auburn, Alabama has a very interesting program where they assist students with room and board, and those students also provide fire service assistance to the community. A program like that might make some sense here. So you'd have professional firefighters that would only be here for the length of their schooling, which would never put them in a position where they're part of the retirement problem. They would be professionals and then they would rotate out. Beyond the institutes of higher learning, you could go to that military-style model to supplement fire services going forward. It wouldn't have to be students in college, but I think that might be a pool that could be considered we could pull from.
You know, that's a really, I'm sorry, that's a really interesting model, and I've read a little bit on that. And it also, you know, who knows, maybe they love that job and they decide to stay in, and then they can certainly choose to. But we have Prescott College, Yavapai College, Emory-Riddle. I mean, it would just be a huge resource.
Can you explain in more detail the military style?
Yeah, it's the idea that, you know, the military has a reputation of professionalism, but they rotate people in and out on a fairly regular basis. Some people make a career of it, but most people come in for a finite period of time, 3 to 5 years, 2 to 4 years. It's the same concept for a fire service where you would bring in somebody, they would train up, they would be part of fire services for a finite period of time, but they wouldn't be there long enough to get a retirement. So you would have the skill set of a firefighter, but not the long-term liability of their pension.
Wouldn't we be expending a lot of money up front, training those people, and then they leave after a short term?
It would depend on what specifically they were doing. There would be a tremendous amount of training if it was fire and emergency medical. I think that's fair, Dennis. But if it was specifically fire, there would be some training, but not to the same level.
Yeah, just to supplement Mr. Lamar's comments. Yeah, this is very conceptual as we speak to this today, but much like in a military career where folks have a short or defined period of time, and even with the Tier 3, with the portability of Tier 3, I think, and the changing workforce, our millennials, that is going to become more of an attraction for many folks. So this is kind of getting ahead of the power curve a little bit, I think, because I think across the industry, across the fire service industry, you're going to see some changes where people want to do it short-lived. And I think as you see changes happen both interior to Arizona and elsewhere, that's going to become much more of a model for sustainability moving forward.
But is this just a way to keep them from qualifying and vesting in the system? I thought we were told that they vested the day they became firefighters.
They would vest in a system at some point, I would suspect, or perhaps there's some offsets as far as room and board or those kind of things in a college model. And really, it is a young person's game, so to speak. So you want to make sure that there's the technical side of that. To make much of an investment up front, there's some community college programs, even through JTED, that I think we could still further explore. And again, it's very conceptual, but there
just
could
so
be
I can
some
clarify too. The liability ends up with the entity from which the firefighter retires. So, for instance, I'm just kind of spitballing here too. You would bring somebody on in an enlisted kid goes in the military for, say, 6 years. So you bring somebody on with a 6-year contract. You provide the training for that person, which we don't do now, right? I mean, the college classes. You bring that person on, and it's basically he or she is a contract employee with the same benefits and does accrue some. They're mandatory to accrue the PSPRS benefit, but at that 6-year period, the city gets to make the decision. They're essentially taken out of that protected due process, and they're effectively let go, or there's an employer determination as to whether to keep that person on. It's sort of a mutual decision. The person has to choose to stay. The organization has to choose to keep that person. And once you get past that 6 years, they're on, I guess you could call it a career track or something like that. But I'll give you for instance, when I was at Glendale, we did that with our prosecutors. We put them on 3-year contracts in the city prosecutor's office, and the ones we choose to keep, we kept, and the ones we didn't want to keep anymore, we let go after 3 years. They accrued all of the benefits that other employees accrued. They just were on a contract term. So it's a doable thing.
I guess I would question whether or not we'd get the same level of dedication and professionalism in that kind of model that we have as opposed to what we have.
You didn't.
That's really an intangible that would be hard to measure at this particular junction. I know Auburn and a couple of places that are doing it through the universities, they are having some success. But again, one of the determining factors is they are specific to fire. They don't get into the EMS side of things. So from that perch, there is a benefit to be realized if such a model would work. But there's a lot of vetting of the model just from a concept that would still have to take place.
Councilman Shiska.
Thanks, Mayor. Chief, could I get your opinion here? Tier 3 is much different from a retirement standpoint than, say, Tier 1. And do you have any feeling one way or the other about whether this will somewhat lessen the number of people who use firefighting as a career?
Wow, that is really crystal balling. I think having raised a millennial that's changed jobs much more frequently doesn't necessarily follow he's still in the same career path but jumps around a bit more. I would say that I think the demographics with whom we hire nowadays is shifting somewhat. There's still going to be legacies, I guess, those that have family members that have followed the fire profession that you're always going to have. But I think you're going to see a little blending of that. And some of the, I guess, experts in that field, the sociologists and those kind of things, see that as kind of, that's kind of going to be the trend. And I think the Tier 3 allows for those accommodations to be made.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And also, Chief, I think the people that did stay would be the ones that move up to be their engineers, captains, and
Yeah, much like an enlisted force, you know, you need to have career progression. We are beneficial in the sense that we have multiple tracks that we can take. We can have a technical track, you can have a promotional track. You can even diversify across divisional lines once you move up through those ranks. So I think it is a still desired after career. You know, I say that kind of tongue-in-cheek. At our last testing, we had 100 and some odd candidates that are already qualified as firefighter 1 and 2 and EMT or paramedics. So we still get to pick the cream of the crop.
Keep going.
Okay. In terms of the last bullet point, we will examine, or we can look at emergency medical responses holistically, from dispatch to first response to transport. You know, I think it's fair to say that currently and going forward, the emergency medical element is always going to be a large part of our fire department, the largest part. And examining what we're doing and if there's ways to tweak with the model or discuss the model, we should do. We should look at ideas, explore ideas, and determine what's best for this community going forward. And then I put the please don't raise the red flag, because these are things that haven't been vetted at all, but they're hypothetical service delivery alternatives that you could consider. Because, you know, nothing's really off the table for consideration. It's what's off the table is what you decide is not appropriate for this community. I mean, I think showing the public that you're exploring as many possibilities as humanly possible pays dividends when you're trying to go for a ballot measure. So with that being said, we have several services that mirror things that go on in the private sector. They're enterprise activities over a long haul, and the mayor alluded to this very early on today, that these aren't decisions you would make overnight. You would have to spend a lot of time vetting these to determine if bringing in a private partner made sense or the complete privatization of any of these made sense. And these are your enterprise funds, your utilities, your street maintenance, your airport. You know, there's been communities that have done on leasing of public facilities. Some of them have done it very well. Some of them have done it very poorly. These are things that would bring in a tremendous amount of money up front theoretically, but they're a complete paradigm shift in service delivery, and they're not something you would make willy-nilly decisions about. You would have to spend a tremendous amount of time and effort vetting these to decide if these are the right thing to do. You know, the easiest one from a national perspective has always been solid waste. But I look at our solid waste services here and I see a high quality product at a low price. So what works in a lot of jurisdictions is not necessarily the best interest of this community. So those are the kinds of things you'd have to get your arms around. And then also you would have to you could look at where contracting out internal services made sense. Do you want a privatization of your IT or your building maintenance or your fleet or your payroll? And again, that's why I said, you know, don't raise the red flag, and please don't print in the paper that these are things that we're going to do. These are things you could consider doing at some point. And probably what I would want from you guys is a thought process over the next few months going forward, or of the alternative service ideas out there, are there specific ones you'd like us to do further exploration of? And we'll be glad to do that for you. And at this point, I'd take any questions or comments.
It was longer than 15 minutes.
I'm sorry. It wasn't.
Questions, comments from the council?
Well, I guess I would just say, kind of going back to what Daniel was saying, is I think the other message we have to get out there is that what a deal it is to live in Prescott as far as the cost for our citizens as compared to citizens that are possibly in the county that are paying much higher rate for their fire protection. And it is much less cost to live in Prescott. And so that's another point that we need to make. And I think some of that speaks to this, Michael. I want to commend you. I think you've just done a tremendous job with the reorganization. And I know we've saved some money, but that's a one-time deal.
That's correct.
But I'm excited not only because you've saved money, but I really think it's going to be a more efficient system.
Thank you, Council.
Effective system, I should say. Not efficient, effective.
Any comments, questions from the council?
I do. Mayor. Michael, I'm for all of these.
At least some preliminary exploration.
Okay, and I brought this up when we were doing this before.
Yes.
And I'm not looking for the lowest bidder.
No.
Okay, I'm looking for, can somebody come in and do what we're doing, because the city of Prescott does it well, no matter what service, all these services. But is there somebody private that can come in and do what we're doing, whether it be pickup on Christmas or whatever we're doing, and not shorting the folks receiving these services? I don't know why we don't do it, kind of on a regular basis.
Maybe prioritize them, Greg, and we can try to bang a couple off at a time. If that's
Sure.
something. I'd be glad to do that.
Any other questions, comments?
I have one comment about utilities. I think we need to look at the experience of other cities, privatized utilities, where a company comes in and makes a big investment in the infrastructure and upgrades the lines, and it's just what the city wanted. Then they turn right around and raise the rates so high
You're right.
that people are driven out of
Council.
Well, and all those factors should be looked at. I mean, and we want the same comparable service. I don't think, and I know Steve brought this up when we were looking at solid waste, I don't think anybody could do what we're doing. No. But we owe it to the folks that we represent that show that we're looking at this.
Yeah.
Any other questions, comments from the council?
Yeah, I have a question, Mayor. John, what do we have to do to forward to staff that we want them to get ballot language together for a .75?
Why don't we hold that one for a few minutes, because I haven't had the...
Oh, I'm sorry, Mayor. I'm sorry.
Let's kind of finish this subject and then...
Yeah, that's fine.
Go ahead.
No, I'm good.
Oh, you did.
It's the next one that I want to talk about, too.
Okay. Any questions, comments from the public?
Hello again, I'm Daniel Mattson, live on Merritt Street. When we went over the general plan, we talked about a lot of the services that were delivered and how it's done by Prescott, and especially when it comes to utilities. We've got an extremely complex infrastructure by necessity because of the changes in elevations and all that. I think we do a pretty good job of it. I'm seriously doubtful that we're going to find any private entity that's going to do any better, or that we can trust to keep our rates reasonable. The one area that was discussed from time to time that I think there's room for improvement, and I'm sure Dennis would agree with it, is the provision of medical response. I don't know if we really have to have a fire engine respond to everything. We might look into gaining a little efficiency in that area. But other than that, I think the city of Prescott is doing a darn good job. And as Billy was saying earlier, it's not only do we have the lowest sales tax in the area, even if we add the 0.75, our property taxes are much lower because we aren't in a fire district. I mean, if we work at this, I think we can probably sell the voting public on the idea that it would be wise to go ahead and approve a 0.75% sales tax on August 29th. And Steve and Jim, you've both been here longer than the rest of the council, and I know you guys can remember discussions of this topic 5-6 years ago when we were going over the budget and all that. We knew that there was a problem coming down the tracks with PSPRS. We just didn't know the extent of it until the board told us the numbers. And so some people in this city have been looking at it a lot longer than the couple years that was referenced by Greg. I mean, it's been obvious for a long time that this was going to be a problem we'd have to contend with. So I think getting some ballot language out there that we can start looking at and discussing and educating the public on is important to do sooner rather than later.
Well, Dan, I'll just say one thing. When you talk about property tax, you need to kind of differentiate between city and county. Yeah, because I have people, when you just say property tax, everybody always thinks county.
Yep.
Right. Well, we have
so
in our city, we don't have a fire district tax because we pay that through the general fund, and that we're so much more efficient with the model we have right now than the county, than Prescott Valley, than Chino Valley. We should be counting our blessings on that. And even though we have a big problem with PSPRS, it's manageable if we would just say, hey, you know, a little bit more. And people who say it's regressive, I'm a homeless advocate. The homeless people are going to pay a bigger percentage of what money they have. I don't think 75 cents on $100 is really that big an issue.
Yeah.
It's just not that much.
Yeah, all I'm saying is, you know, we need to always differentiate between county and city property tax.
Our city property tax is way lower than the
I know,
surrounding
but when I talk to people and you just use the word property tax, they always think county. They tell me my tax is too high. I don't want to pay anything.
Yeah.
You know, they don't realize that we're talking city property tax, which on a $200,000 home we said was like $62 a year.
Right, we're way lower than the surrounding
Yeah,
area.
so I just like to make that differentiation with everybody out there so they understand that. Any other questions, comments from the public?
Are we talking about PSPRS?
Yeah. I mean, if you got a question.
So my name is Joe Chica. I'm at 4855 Butterfly Drive in Prescott, and I'm new to the conversation. But my personal experience with police and the pension fund is that growing up, my father was a police officer for 21 years. And in his in line of duty, he was shot by someone who just wanted to shoot a cop and wanted to know what it felt like to do that. And it's personal to me, being part of the conversation, seeing and knowing what our officers, and fire is no different, but what our officers go through on a regular basis. As far as the tax is concerned, I know that I don't speak for everybody, but I would be perfectly happy paying a 0.75 increase in sales tax. And I'm no legal scholar either, but if we did that, would it be reasonable to consider maybe even going at the state with a lawsuit, considering we are paying this tax down ourselves? Because we do want to, it's our problem. It may not necessarily have been our problem to begin with, but it's our problem now. And we want to be proactive about it by paying down that PSPRS fund. Is it feasible to go after the state as well on top of, and I'm not sure, maybe John would be the person to talk to about that.
He doesn't want to talk about it now.
Well, I won't talk about it. But I wasn't sure if that's legally, if that was feasible.
Yeah, we'll have to take a look at that. Yeah, we'll have to take a look at that. Yeah,
sure. And then if we have a sunset on this tax, which I think that's perfectly reasonable, if we're using other cost measures to bring that tax down, maybe at the end of we figure out we have more money, and this has all been talked about. I think I'm just reiterating. If we see that we have more money in our that reserve fund, and we're paying, maybe we have too much, so we just end up every year paying a little bit more to it, and it helps bring that down. We could eventually get to a point where we don't have to worry about that sunset because it pays it off in the long run. So I just wanted to say that I think that that's a great idea.
We'll tell your dad that we appreciate his service.
Thank you.
Where'd your dad, where was he on the force?
Pittston, Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Billy, you got something on here?
Actually, I'm going to yield to Steve, and then I'll follow up because you wanted to go ahead and speak.
Thanks, Billy.
Let me see if I'm done
Sure.
with the public here. Anybody else from the public that's got a comment? Okay.
Thank you, Mayor. I was just asking, John, since it says recommended action for discussion purposes and direction, how do we go about giving direction to staff?
Well, we have to vote by resolution as to the ballot. In other words, what you're going to specifically put on the ballot has to be voted on, adopted by resolution. Right? Resolution? Yeah. So I know that there's sort of this concept of a 0.75. The next voting meeting is the 28th. So, but there's a lot of other pieces and parts that you may want to talk about, or you should probably talk about, whether you want to include it in the ballot language or not. You know, part of it is, and I know there's the simple, keep it simple, stupid. idea. But, the
Are
question...
you referring to anybody in particular?
I did this. I brought flowers yesterday.
We won't go there.
My wife, and they were frozen when they arrived. So, and frozen is not good. That means they were dead. So anyway, but point is if you wanted to do another discussion on Tuesday the 21st, next Tuesday, to finalize focusing on strictly the ballot language, in terms of sunsetting, length of time, because one of the big questions is going to be, I think we all agree, pay off the unfunded liability is an improper term.
Pay it down.
Pay down. So what's the trigger for the sunset? Is it 90% funded? Is it 95? Those are the kinds of things I think we need to include in the ballot language. 10 years or 90% funded. So if we, and I'm not saying I love meetings, but if we had another meeting on Tuesday the 21st to kind of nail down what it is that there's a consensus to put on the ballot, then it's rather simple to draft the resolution to put it on the agenda for the 28th.
Well, I think it would be
Or you could do
good
it
to
now.
have some draft ballot language to base our discussion on.
Yeah,
We
and
can tweak it from there if we need to.
Yeah, understood. And we can sort of come up with, I think what we need to do is rather than come up with language, because I'm going to assume 0.75 is the target number, and that's an easy thing to adjust, 0.85, 0.65, 1.0, whatever. But I think what we need to come up with for next Tuesday's discussion is the other things that you may or may not want to include. In other words, what I just said. What's the trigger point for sunset? If it's not 10 years, if it's paid off sooner, what is that? What is it that triggers that sunset?
Well, yeah, John, that's exactly what I was asking you for, though, is how do we have a formal process for directing staff to come up with a ballot language that we could discuss?
So, you're right. So we can either continue on tonight and do that, or we can do a Tuesday 21st meeting to really nail down precisely what it is you want on the ballot language, and then on the 28th it gets formal approval. Or we could continue to do it now.
Can you bring the 21st a wire-framed ordinance?
Well, we could bring the points that you're going to want to consider. I mean, you don't need the ballot language ordinance is very simple. But I think those are what is it that you want on there?
Yeah, I think that the points are what, you believe that's what
Well,
you...
But you've heard all of us, and I think the points are all
Yeah,
the same.
I really think, honestly, I think we're there. So got a designated 0.75 sales tax to sunset in 10 years. Maybe what the discussion we need to talk about are if there is a trigger before, because we're not going to pay this off, but we will pay it down till it's manageable, which is what I like below the $2 million rate. Mark, is that
90% funded?
That was paying off the full unfunded liability. The remaining amount was just the normal pension
normal,
costs,
which
which
is-
you're always going to have.
okay? So which is 1 million, right?
Yeah, approximately 1 million now. It'll probably be 1.2, 1.3 in 10 years.
Well, here's the tricky part about that. We can't have will be on ballot language. It has to be a precise number or a precise funding level for ballot language. So we can bring a resolution back next Tuesday, but there needs to be ballot language has to be precise. Because, and this is I'm not using the last initiative as an example in the pejorative, but it was so convoluted
Absolutely.
that it was too complicated. So we need some specifics. We can work with Mark and come up with a draft resolution for next Tuesday. My recommendation, however, is to set it for approval on the 28th, because I think.
Why could we not approve that next week?
I just think that if sometimes changes that happen on the floor have unintended consequences, that we should have time to think about.
But we could make a choice not to vote on it.
I guess we can set it up for a vote. My concern is that sometimes there are last-minute changes that need to be thought through more than just in a 4 or 5 minute discussion on something that's this important.
And I guess my concern in this is that we don't send mixed messages out there to our citizens. That, you know, if we have something that's straightforward, it's simple, it seems to me that we have.
Again, we can
Yeah.
agendize it for discussion and possible action on the 21st.
I think that's.
But I would strongly recommend that if there are some substantial changes or some substantial debate
Yeah.
at the last minute, that we take time to kind of think about it to make sure that we get the language right. And because in recent history here, we've done some last minute changes, and then we're learning as we implement things that there are unintended consequences.
Well, if this was a mortgage, it'd be a whole lot easier.
Yeah, clearly.
But it's not.
Right.
But I definitely think that Billy, I wouldn't have any problem with the 28th if we can nail down some language and then vet the language for the next week.
Here's my suggestion. Let's agendize it for the 21st for discussion, possible action. But again, if at that 21st meeting there's some real changes, substantial things that we really kind of need to think about, I'm going to highly recommend that we postpone that to the 28th. So you have the option of approving something on the 21st by way of the agenda. And if you take it kind of at face value from what we draft without anything real substantially changing from that, you know, we'll think it through. But if there are some real changes to it, we'll want to make sure that we get it right and not approve it that night. We'll want to make sure that the language is really accurate.
Yep.
For ballot language, because you get one shot.
And really
and I think that's good. It's just easier to respond if you have something in front of you that you're looking at. So.
Any other questions, comments? I guess the only thing I've got is, have we covered all the options? There's no more further discussion on options?
Mr. Mayor, I don't know what other options we could go through that are going to make the immediate impact of the magnitude that we're talking about. I mean,
Okay.
And I would just add that finally deciding to put something on the ballot isn't mutually exclusive of all the other options we're talking about. I don't think that's the intent
I understand
here.
that.
Yeah.
I just
All
wanted to
these
make
other
sure we
things
covered
happen.
all the options we thought we would want to consider. Okay. All right, if there's no further discussion, this has nothing to do with the people on the dais. James Madison, in a speech to the Constitutional Convention in 11 July 1787, said, "All people having power ought to be distrusted to a certain degree." Meeting adjourned.
Amen.